Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Terry Martin.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'll just put this down here. And we'll get going. So, welcome to this panel on Europe's green ambitions and how those ambitions stack up against global realities. As we all know, as you all know, the European Union has set itself one of the most ambitious green agendas, climate agendas in the world. But we have to ask ourselves, how is Europe going to face the growing challenge of going green and at the same time remaining competitive, right? Going green and remaining competitive. How do you do these two things together? Europe is aiming to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, but how can European industry and employment thrive while doing that? Because it's going to require massive changes in all sorts of aspects of our lives and economy. Are we developing the right tools to manage the transition, or are we risking what many are calling deindustrialization? What about the backlash from business and the public? Well, we've got just the right group of people with us here to explore these questions. I'd like to invite our esteemed speakers onto the stage, please. Please give them a warm round of applause. All of you, please join us. I'll introduce them as they're finding their seats. Right here is Martin Hojsík. He's Vice President of the European Parliament and one of its most active voices on climate legislation. Next to him, Kyriacos Kakouris is Vice President of the European Investment Bank, deeply involved in green financing in the EU and beyond. Next to him, Becker, Vice President for External Affairs and Sustainability at BMW Group, helping to steer the automotive industry, the automotive sector through the green transition, as it were. And moving right along, we've got Markus J. Beyrer. He's Director General of BusinessEurope, representing the concerns of Europe's business and employer community. Next to him, at the very end, we round out our panel with Karel Lannoo. He's CEO of the Center for European Policy Studies, better known as CEPS, one of Europe's leading economic policy think tanks. I've also put together for this session a Slido poll, just a basic question. We're all used to this now. You see it on your board to get everyone's input on what we're talking about here. And the question is, which path should the EU prioritize to stay both green and competitive? I won't go through the 5 options there, but it'd be great if you could get your Slido going on your phone or your tablet and just type in your answer there. You can also use Slido, by the way, to put questions to the panelists, which we hope we can get to towards the end of our discussion. So, without further ado, let's begin. I'm just going to put a question to each of you going down the row here, starting with you, Martin. You're in the European Parliament. You've been pushing for stronger climate action. Are you not just a little bit concerned, we talked about this in the green room just a little bit, that the EU's targets, its rules, its regulations are moving a bit too fast for Europe's industries to keep up and be competitive?
I would put it slightly differently. I think what we have is the challenge not with the target. And actually, if you see the latest Commission estimates, we are heading well on the 2030 target. I think what I dare to say underestimated.
Underestimate the challenge?
No, underestimated how we need to also look at 2 aspects from a policy perspective better. And that's one thing is the unleashing of the innovation power, unleashing of the business opportunities. That actually the climate policy is really intrinsically connected with the single market, that the innovators, that the scale-ups and startups are facing not the challenges of EU-level policies. But the fact that there is so much gold plating and so much obstacles, what the IMF put at 40% not barriers, but tariffs for goods and 120% for services. And second, that and of course the element of social justice, that it shouldn't be those who are the most rich to benefit, that they only benefit from heat pumps, electric cars, proper energy efficient housing and other things. But other thing is also the security. Being at Globsec, our dependency on fossil fuels is killing Ukrainians. We have financed, through our high dependency on imports of Russian fossil fuels, oil and gas, we have financed the killing in Ukraine. It's not a climate thing. But at the same time, if we would have been better in unleashing the power of energy efficiency, renewables, looking at these strategic investments done in China, where we're lagging behind in innovation with China, we would be giving less money to Putin, and that's also one of the tasks. You don't have to do it for the planet. You should, but do it for the profit and do it for the security.
We got multiple things on the table already. I really appreciate you laying out those points involving the global context. We're looking at tariffs, a changing tariffs environment, which makes it really difficult to plan, not least for bankers who have to, have to make decisions over the long term on that too. So, Kyriacos, the European Investment Bank, it plays a key role in financing the green transition in different ways. But do you feel that you're really investing enough in the industries that Europe needs in order to be competitive, whether those be in the green area of green transition or not? Do you think you see a horizon where those things can be brought together in terms of the projects that you're financing?
I have to say that the goals, EU for carbon neutrality and climate action until 2050 are maybe ambitious, but they are essential. Climate change threatens our societies, our economies, our lives. I mean, I live in Cyprus, currently in Luxembourg, but I remember in 2023, for 20 days, end of July, beginning of August, we have continuously above 40 degrees. Last year, in 2024, I was really curious how this is going to happen. We didn't have 20 days in continuously, but we have many days, 3-4 days, around 44, 45. Wow. So we have global warming saying that it's 1.5 degrees Celsius per year, but in Southern Europe, in certain parts of the globe, it's probably, we feel it that it's around 5 degrees. I mean, this is how I feel in Cyprus, and this is really scares me. At the European Investment Bank, climate action and green transition for us is a top priority. Out of around 88 billion euros, 60% go to climate change and sustainability projects, 60% of our financing. And we still think that this is not enough, or still there is a lot to do. I don't want to give numbers. I don't like to give numbers and how we're going to bridge the financing gap that the economies are facing, the regions are facing. But I think we have to concentrate and be focused on the green transition.
And it must be kept in mind that whatever Europe is doing, that's only going to be part of the solution, right? This has to happen in a global context. So, I'm hoping that we'll be able to get into that a little bit as well, because Europe isn't going to lower the temperature on Cyprus or Southern Europe by itself. It's
absolutely cannot do it alone. I mean, this is what I mean. Without looking what the neighbors are doing, that's why we are supporting also our neighbors, and not only.
Thomas Becker, you're a senior executive at BMW, car maker, big German car maker, cars being exported all over the world, manufactured in different parts of the world as well, it must be said. You're right in the middle of Europe's green transformation, having to make hard decisions about what cars to build and what technologies to use and how to compete against competitors, for example, coming from China. Do you feel that the current EU regulations are helping or hurting your ability to compete globally?
Well, let me compare the situation in the US, Europe, and China. In the US, what you see is maximum confrontation about whether to believe that climate change exists in the first place and about the instruments to use. Yesterday, the president signed a law that bans California from regulating climate. He is destroying the reason why we have electric cars. Not many people know that, but the date of birth of Tesla and of all other electric vehicles was 2007 when the Californian regulator introduced what is called the zero-emission vehicle mandate. It is dead since yesterday. With the support of Elon Musk, by the way.
Do you think it'll be dead forever?
That depends on the Supreme Court, but otherwise, by difference from the last Trump administration, they have both houses of Congress and they have a very strong basis in the court. So for this administration, this is presumably it. What happens next may be another amplitude from going to black to white to black to white. China, total contrary. They are pursuing what is an integrated strategy. It is not climate objectives and then industrial strategy adapts to that. It is one strategy with a climate dimension, a resource independence dimension, an industrial policy dimension, and. And it's just working out as planned.
You think Europe can emulate that?
Europe cannot emulate that because our system is obviously very different. But what you can say is that 45% so-called new energy vehicles in China, meaning fully electric, meaning plug-in hybrids, meaning range-extended vehicles, is also the result of the fact that you cannot pay more than 7 cents per kilowatt hour for the electric charging. So there are fundamental things different than in Europe, which are overlooked permanently in our conversations, which are very helpful for them.
I live in Berlin. I pay between 35 and 60 cents per kilowatt hour for the electricity for my electric car.
And you can read in Germany's biggest automotive magazine 2 pages with a fat headline saying, "No cost advantage for electric cars." You will not read that in China.
Yeah, that point can be debated. I mean, I do read the papers, German papers.
So, but let me come to Europe. We have climate objectives, which we all know and which we as a company support. We have a clear plan, and I know that because I've written it, that our total emissions will go down from 2019 to 2030 by 40 million tons, 40. Oh. That is more than a few European member states emit in the first place.
Okay.
And we will do that by electrification, by cleaner materials, by investing into green energy, just to name a few examples. But very clearly, the European strategy to say, there is the climate objective, and then there is exactly one approach how we have to do it, and we ban anything else, has already failed. We just have to take account of that.
Okay, I'm hoping we'll get some, some counter arguments on that from our panel because I think there might be some. Markus, you've warned that the EU risks weakening its own industry through overregulation, right? You represent business interests in Europe, but is it possible to really avoid disruption in a real green transition?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me start by saying the business community has always been clear that we support the overall targets. So we are committed to climate neutrality by mid-century. The problem is, in Europe, we are always a bit obsessed with targets as high as possible, not always based on facts or analysis. And we only after this think about how do we get there. So what we have seen in the last couple of years is maybe too much ideology and not enough pragmatism and analysis of facts. Will this call disruption? Obviously. I mean, that's an enormous change of the way we produce, the way we consume, and so on. Is it the right direction? Yes, and we support it. But we haven't sufficiently discussed in the past how do we get there, and how do we get there in a way that we continue to be economically successful. So now this debate starts. You mentioned the regulatory overburden. I mean, we do a big survey every year called Reform Barometer, where we benchmark Europe towards the world. We have seen that we've been falling behind more and more. We ask the companies, why is it? And of course, there's the cost of energy. This is partly driven by the asymmetric shock of the war we have in Ukraine, not only, but this is a big factor. But then there's the regulatory overburden. And what we have seen in the last couple of years is simply a regulatory tsunami. And our companies all tell us they're drowning in regulations. So what we need is to find a feasible way how we get there, while simplifying what we have. And to Thomas's point, I think we also had the obsession that we had bureaucracy wanting to micromanage the companies. This cannot work. I mean, either you have a system like in China, where you plan things and then they work or don't work, or you have a free market economy, which we have and claim to have. Then you set certain targets, frameworks, a direction, but then you need to leave it to the companies to find the best way to get there. So one of the things we are very much asking for, beside, of course, simplification, is tech neutrality, and in many, many, many policy fields. And we have too many pieces of regulation where it says tech neutrality in the preamble, and when you go to the text, it says the opposite.
Do you look with longing then across the Atlantic to what's going on in the United States in terms of the dismantling of regulation on environmental policy, for example?
Do I look with what?
Longing. Do you look at that as something you wish might come to Europe?
No, because, I mean, if we look, we are in favor of a simplification agenda because we know that our company is drawn in over-regulation. The way it is partly done in the US is maybe not the most feasible way, because, I mean, I don't see the value in scrapping things because you don't fully understand what they're doing and things. So I think there's certainly a better way to do. Where this can be, let's say, a fruitful debate is where, of course, let's say, our US colleagues would say, well, if you want to buy LNG from us, to Martin's point, because we do not want to be dependent on Russia, I mean, then you should not at the same time adopt regulation which under methane terms makes it impossible for the Europeans to buy US LNG. So this is the kind of debate which can be fruitful. But I mean, the way I look to the US at the time being is more for the disruption we have thanks to the tariffs, to the uncertainty, and to all the steps we try to mitigate and deal with, but which at the end, of course, will make it more difficult to produce the wells for the people on both sides of the Atlantic.
This is really interesting that we're talking about Europe, China, and the United States. Got them all on the table, different models of approaching this tension between the desire to go green, the necessity of cooling the planet, and on the other hand, keeping competitiveness in a global market. I want to pass the baton now to Karel. The EU, as we've heard, has a mix of policies. It's famous for regulation. Much of it is admired in different parts of the world, by the way, it must be said. But you know, we've got the emissions trading system. We've got the carbon tax, carbon border tax, right? This is a huge thing, which involving subsidies. Is this mix coherent, would you say, or are we really sending mixed signals to the markets?
If you ask me, so far we have given a very clear signal that we had a green agenda and that we want to move in this direction. What I'm a bit afraid of at the moment from the debates I hear, I mean, also in other panels here this morning, like a panel asked, the organizers asked, is decarbonization still a realistic target? I think most Europeans would fully be convinced we have to move in this direction. And the climate change targets are for, I think, most Europeans still very important targets. We heard the vice president from the European Central Bank, European Investment Bank, saying very clearly, it is a problem. We know the problem of climate. And we see also that, I mean, with meeting the climate goals, we are not there. I mean, we are soon exceeding the 1.5 degrees increase in temperature. So this is one thing. We know the climate problems, and then there is another thing, which is the Brussels regulatory approach. So we have to distinguish both. And this whole debate about over-regulation is now like encompassing the whole debate about climate change. And that is wrong. The problem which we have about over-regulation at European level, I mean, is separate from that. The problem is that, first of all, member states do not necessarily respect what has been decided at European level. So, and I know this very well, one area which I follow the most, financial regulation. I mean, there's something in Brussels and there's something at national level. So we have duality all the time. So that's an extreme cost. And on top of that, the second problem is at European level, the way you approach regulation. And we've seen all the time more and more regulation, what they call in level 1, in the kind of the primary regulation. We have then the secondary regulation. But we have more and more in level 1, and then also an excess in level 2. Again, so that the regulatory burden to overcome this first problem, the fact that member states do not accept what the EU is doing, the reaction from the EU has been to do always regulate more. In the end, what we need to do, and what Brussels needs to do, is be much stronger enforcement. And I would refer to what Thomas said as example, that Brussels should sometimes do like what Trump did yesterday. If the central power, we have a federal construction, doesn't agree with what a state is doing, overrule the state right away. And that is missing. That even if Germany, even if France is not agreeing with something, that we overrule. And we can do this, for example, like in the domain of trade. You asked about Mercosur. Will Mercosur be adopted? It can be adopted by the qualified majority. But sometimes the Commission has far too much fear, certainly, to go against a strong member state. We need basically a bit more respect of federal construction. And if we do this, we will overcome this regulatory problem.
Okay, I mean, this is interesting in itself, what you're discussing, this approach to regulation and how to lay it out and how to get member states to cooperate and what all. That's a huge discussion that's going on right now in its own right. But I just want to focus in on this tension, as I've laid out, between competitiveness and the green ambition on the other hand. How do you see this is this regulation that is there in place and you think should be enforced with greater force? Do you think that regulation is going to allow competition for Europe to survive in a competitive environment?
In this regulation, we have, for example, green finance regulation, how to say what is green. We have energy regulation, energy efficiency, extremely important. We have, for example, the raw materials regulation. Why do we want to have, or we have the circular economy. Why do we want, for example, the Critical Raw Materials Act? To reduce our dependency on third countries. Why do we want to have circular economy? To make sure that we recycle much more what we put today into all kinds of electronic instruments. Today, recycling from electronic instruments is 9%. And at the same time, we have an enormous dependence on critical raw materials from China. Why do we want the Critical Raw Materials Act? To reduce this dependence, to have our own critical raw materials, and to have our own manufacturing.
So I think you're saying that there's potential even within the regulatory framework when it comes to.
And let me add, let's say on energy efficiency, for example, that is also extremely important. If we were not to regulate at European level, we will never get on these climate targets.
Okay. The Slido poll, we laid this out at the beginning. I know that there's some follow-up that wants to happen on the panel, and I want to allow that too. I'd just like to quickly bring in the results of the Slido poll, preliminary results of the Slido poll. They're probably not going to change too much. I think we have 58 people voting there and 72% saying that technological leadership and innovation is the way to go. So, where is regulation in that whole thing? Starting, not too strong, not too much support there for that. But again, the business environment needs regulation too, right? Not just to regulate business, but for the purpose of giving business a blueprint, a set of rules that they can operate on and plan and invest, right? So we have to factor that into. Interesting result. Would you like to comment?
For me, actually, it's a very good result. And I think this is all very much about how the framing, because yes, people, for example, carbon pricing, it's been built as a market-based principle, yeah? And that's where also the CBAM, so carbon border adjustment mechanism, is something which is coming in. But obviously it's not where we're lacking. Where we're lacking is, and that's what I like to see, that I like in the result, is that it's the identification of what we can do better. And I'll have to get back to something. One of the things I really appreciate, actually, and I think this is a change from when we would have the same panel 10 years ago, no one is questioning the fact that we have to do things to get to zero. That we have to, not just Europe, globally. And I think this is, having been working on the issue for quite a while, I think this is really the most important fundamental change. Because then, instead of what you see in Europe, and I don't agree, but it's like if you believe in climate change. Because this is not about believing, like science is not a faith. Science is science. I disagree with Markus about kind of the activist goals. I don't think that the European Science Panel on Climate Change is an activist body. This is the people who are in the climate law suggesting the goals. The goal itself actually is always less than the science tells us because it's a political agreement. But the ideas coming from the science are clear. What I think we really need to look at, and this is where I think the fruitful discussion is starting, okay, we know where we want to get, so let's work better together on how we get there. And I think this is the super important part, identifying and learning from this. Because the difference in the United States is, yes, the current administrations, at least number of the proponents and persons from the administration, are denying the science. Are denying vaccines, for Christ's sake.
It's really funny. I'm a journalist, so facts are very close to my heart. I do fact-based journalism. And just hearing you say science is science, I love that because it references something that I used to use in seminars where I was teaching from The West Wing. I don't know if you ever watched West Wing, and it was a television series, and there's someone trying to convince the president to use a particular policy because the science supports it so very clearly. And he was saying, yes, sure, science is science, but this would kill me politically, right? If I can't, we can't do that yet. And then so I ended up not making a decision on it at all. But anyway, Markus, you wanted to say something before?
One small thing.
Okay, small.
And this is something which I think is also important, is what we cannot forget. And it was really well said, it's kind of like Commission being stronger in enforcement is, as SME from Slovakia, innovative in a construction business, them placing their stuff on the European market means certification in each member state and in Germany on each Bundesland. Yeah. And this is not a European legislation. This is, I think, what we often forget. I think Europe gets blamed unfairly for things that it didn't create. And that's why you see the delegated acts, because exactly this is a thing of trying to protect it. So let's work together, not only making sure that the European legislation works and is streamlined, but also that we prevent the member states from messing it up and creating barriers for business, for innovation, for the prosperity.
Thank you, Martin. Now I will bring Markus in quickly, and then I want to get some questions from the audience and get things going that way.
Fully agree with Mercosur, fully agree with enforcement, fully agree with we need to reduce the barriers in the single market. Nobody questions science. All this is clear. I think the issue we have is that politicians have not been totally honest with everybody that this will come at the cost and with certain pain. And the direction is still right. But this is something which should have been done from the outset. But what I wanted to say before everything, of course we need to do, but we can only do together in the world. Europe needs to lead by example. Our share at the time being is 7%. Our share will be 4% in 2030. Which means we only have a chance to positively impact world climate if we prove to the world that we can decarbonize while staying economically successful. Because if we don't it will have a negative effect on the climate policy in the world, because in the world we're living, I mean, the US couldn't care less at the time being, the US administration. China is a bit different, because I think they see the problem more in others. But if we are not proving it can work economically, the well-meaning will say, it's a pity, it would have been so nice, but it doesn't work. And the others would say, they're really stupid, these Europeans. So this is a very important point, that we lead by example, but by showing that it can work positively. 2 final sentences. So far it doesn't really work. I mean, there's good elements, but a lot of the decarbonization in Europe so far has been done via deindustrialization. This cannot be the way forward.
Of course.
And second, I think we are on a rescue mission. We are on a rescue mission, of course, for the business location, number 1, but we are also on a rescue mission for the goals which are highlighted here, because it's a simple truth. If industry, if business is not investing in the transformation, and in many sectors that's the case, because CEOs tell me, sorry, there's no business case, then the targets will be on paper. And what we want is to make them work.
Thomas Becker, I know you wanted to intervene. I also want to bring in a question from the audience that is being directed to you regarding alternatives to electric vehicles. Are there other technologies that might be in the pipeline? So first, please, your intervention, and then address that question.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with that. I mean, if we look back to 2020-21, when the decision about the banning of the combustion engine was taken, we were in a phase where no single living person was admired as much by politicians as Elon Musk was. He was stood on a big pedestal, the ultimate hero transforming the industry, right? Secondly, was there any discussion about dependence on raw materials or the ability of anybody to just switch off your factories here in Europe? We believed that Peter Carlsson, another big hero, would revolutionize European battery manufacturing with Northvolt. We all believed that. We invested in that, right? Where are we today? We are having a situation where China is demonstrating that with rare earth export rules, you can make sure that if you don't want it, no car produces any music, it doesn't break, and you also will not buckle up with your seatbelt because you need the stuff for magnets without which it doesn't work. What we also have been seeing is that, and we built electric cars since 2013, right? That we are now in, let's say, football-wise speaking, in minute 50 to 55 of the game. And we are at 17% electric vehicle share in Europe. And we are further ahead than most of the others. The game will not end with 100% in the 90th minute. So the answer to this challenge is not to dump the climate targets like the Trump administration is doing it. The answer is to say, all right, I have a ton of CO2, which is under the responsibility of a company like ours. Which are the levers I can pull in order to get rid of it? And the first one is indeed use the superior efficiency of the electric drivetrain and electrify further. But we are not going to have 100%. Secondly, think about the electricity that goes into a car. Make it greener. We, by the way, invest in green electricity, for example, in China, and we invest in green charging along the motorways in the joint ventures that we are part of. You can decarbonize conventional fuels. You can use stuff like HVO 100, and you can think about your supply chain. We have seen massive innovation and competition for getting carbon out of steel, aluminium, plastic, and of batteries. A lot you can do here. And this is something where we are strongly believing in, that if you say you have to demonstrate that we reduce the ton and hold us accountable for that, you do not have to continue the pathway of the last few years with ever more detailed technical regulation, banning, and quotas, which I totally agree will become more and more counterproductive if we do not rethink the toolbox without sacrificing the targets we are pursuing.
So just to be clear in terms of the audience question, getting back to that, with alternatives to electric, you seem to be suggesting that electric really is where things should be going in terms of greening the car industry.
It's a main contributor, but it will not be the only option that will be accepted. Because what we very clearly see, including in a country like this one, there will be no voluntary full electrification in 2035 and also not in 2040, and it is not needed. By the way, nobody in China even considers banning combustion cars.
Yeah.
Not even consider it.
But it's, you've touched on a really important point here as well, and that this is where geopolitics comes into play. It is already in our discussion here. We've been talking about tariffs and whatnot, but the stranglehold that China has on rare earths and certain elements that are needed to build to fuel the green transition, whether we're talking batteries or wind turbines, and this. So at this conference, dealing with geopolitics to some degree, that's a big factor as well. We really don't know where all that is heading at this point. Direct questions from the audience. I'd like to please bring you in if we can. We have people here with microphones standing by. If you have a question, please raise your hand and identify yourself. And when I give you the floor, someone will bring a microphone to you if anyone has a question for our panel. Any questions? Think about it. No, oh, I think I see one. Oh, there we go. Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Marc-Antoine Amaziga from the French Institute for International Affairs. I'd love to ask a question to our banker. Thanks for being with us. The EIB is clearly one of our strongest assets for the energy transition. Now, could you tell us how you plan to move, or if you plan, and how you plan to move from being the climate bank to the energy resilience bank that we need? Because what I still see is a lot of money that is being lent to a lot of projects that actually would not probably need the EIB to be involved, but not enough to high capital risk projects where actually we would need the EIB to be involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I have to say that we are going to that direction. I mean, we don't compare, we cannot say we're a resilient bank or not, but we finance from simple, let's say, a solar panel to more complicated projects that the market needs, and I agree very much. I have to comment on our poll to that about the importance of innovation and technology in the green transition, and I think it's very obvious that green transition is also a technological transition and a revolution. So we do finance this development, and we try to scale up cutting-edge technologies like renewable energy, smart grids, green hydrogen, energy storage, carbon capture. These technologies are not only reducing emissions, but also they are open to new business and new opportunities in order to help Europe to move one step ahead to the green transition.
Okay, we do have another question standing by here in the front, but Karel, you're listening to all of this from your perspective, kind of outside business and outside of policymaking. You have we'll assume a slightly broader scientific perspective on all of this from your think tank. I'm just wondering how you look at all of these, what's on the table right now, particularly with the tension between competitiveness and the green transition. We know we need both, right? We all agree on that. It's not of course we do. But where are the pressure points that we can realistically make a difference? I mean, there's one thing in trying to maybe change decision-making processes within Europe. Many would love to see a federalist Europe where we had things were a bit more central decision-making. You seemed to be kind of pushing it a little in that direction yourself a moment ago. But what can be done now? What's the one thing that could be done within Europe by the business community and the policymaking community to get together on moving the ball forward on achieving both climate on mitigation and improving competitiveness?
If I look at it specifically from a Brussels perspective, from the debate which we have ongoing in Brussels, what we call, I think, I don't know whether people in the audience know the omnibuses, which are basically the whole debate about deregulation, what we have in the, above all in the climate sphere, which has started with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the Due Diligence Directive, is that we create confusion rather than clarity. And that we will have less disclosure rather than the disclosure which we need today. Because, I mean, the debate goes now, for example, that small companies will not be subject to that anymore. The problem is that many bankers have said to me, but we want this information. So today, I mean, most, say, investors have financial information, but don't have the non-financial information, what they call the double materiality. The debate goes in direction, first of all, let's say that this will only be applicable from 1,000 employees onwards, which means plenty of companies will no longer be subject. So bankers come to me and say, but how will I ever know? But it's also from a governance perspective much better that if you're sitting on a board of a company, even a smaller company, that you not only have the financial targets, but also the environmental targets. And sustainability targets may have to do with energy, may have to do with waste, may have to do with efficiency, I mean, may have to do with recycling. But the debate as it's going in Brussels now, and you can follow this also on LinkedIn, I think it's a debate of, I mean, of an entire confusion. We have opened a Pandora's box because von der Leyen has said we want to have this 25% reduction in regulatory burden, but we're opening something and it can end up being more complex than less. So it will be even more difficult for the EU, I mean, to sell what it's standing for than less difficult. And that's what I fear, because I come from another member state and another debate in Portugal. I'm now here. Sometimes if you're outside Brussels, the EU is extremely far away. And you see that the support for what the EU is doing is extremely low, even if it's trying to do climate goals, even if it has these, for example, goals on recycling or on the digital agenda and so on. But if we then have these debates, it just doesn't contribute to that. So I would have preferred, let's say, to stick to what we did and to change the rules, what I tried to explain, in a level 2, in secondary legislation, not in the primary legislation. But no, von der Leyen wanted to clearly state, we will deregulate and we will make it less burdensome for business. You could have done this in a much simpler way, rather than to opening everything as a Pandora's box.
Markus, no, Thomas, and then Markus. No, Markus, and then Thomas, very, very quickly, and then we're going to bring in our question from the.
No, on this I would need to say I diametrically disagree with my friend Karel. I mean, you cannot. It would have been better to produce decent legislation the first time. We have produced a couple of bureaucratic monsters. Now we need to repair it. You cannot do this at level 2. You need to go to the core, otherwise this will not work. Number 1, CSRD. There's more than 1,000 data points. We have supported this at the beginning because we said it's a good thing. Then we had this cycle where we had this feeling anything goes. So now we have more than 1,000 data points. We work with the financial sector because we are aware that there is certain pieces of information the financial sector needs. Financial sector tells us there's maybe 300 to 350 data points we need. We say 250. We will come up with a joint proposal, but what is for sure is that these data points need to be more than halved to make it workable.
When you say data points, you're talking
about? The data point, the CSRD, this is pieces of information you need to give in the green reporting.
Okay.
And then we also need, but okay, this is a bit technical now, we also need to reduce the auditing costs, because we don't have a European standard on what, I mean, I forget the word, there's a lighter form of auditing, because of course these reports, you should not audit them at the same heaviness for financial reports. Problem is we don't have standards across the continent, so you have a lot of overperformance, and 2/3 of the cost is auditing cost at the end of the day. So this is something. The second thing, on the due diligence, on the CSDD. Of course, opening up things creates uncertainty. But with the thing we had at the table, we had the certainty that this would not work, and we had the certainty that we would have companies divesting from markets in Asia and Africa. So we need to bring it to a dimension where the feasible goals and European companies are ready and are taking more responsibility than anybody else in the world, are dimensioned to a level where they can be accomplished.
Thomas, very quickly. Yeah.
One practical example on the theory of the financial sector forcing the industry to decarbonize. Nice story, developed around 2020, 2021, and was behind the European taxonomy. The European taxonomy should enable banks to judge how much companies are doing to decarbonize. In our case, this led to a regime which says you have to disclose the turnover of your electric cars. Not to disclose your total CO2 emissions, but the turnover with your electric cars.
Turnover,
but
your revenues that are generated.
Yes. And
Sales.
your investment for
I see.
factories building electric
Right.
cars.
All right.
So, okay. But then, what came on top of it was the so-called do no significant harm criteria, saying if you do climate change policy but harm the environment in any other way, this must not count. And in our case, the body that formulated the taxonomy in Brussels came up with the requirement that an electric car sold by BMW does not qualify as green turnover if the tires on this car have a noise classification of the European Union of more than class B. Meaning that if one of our Chinese customers, and this is a global regime as you know, thinks that with minus 25 degrees in Manchuria, where we have our production plant, grip of a winter tire may be important than the noise it produces, and chooses a tire which is not qualified according to the European Union's criteria. Unfortunately, this turnover doesn't matter. This is why we clearly advocate to just skip it.
Okay.
The information how fast a car maker goes electric is available from sufficient other sources. You do not need a bloody taxonomy for that. Namely not one which is combined with criteria, so to say, as ridiculous as these.
Very interesting example. I will bring you in, Martin, but first there's a gentleman sitting here in the front row who's been waiting to deliver his question. Go ahead.
Thank you for the floor. Is it working? Yeah. Thank you for the floor. My name is Emmanuel. I'm from Slovakia, and I'm representing EPP Youth for Slovakia. My question would be to all, and since you assisted me the question and the topic, my question would be regarding like all the stuff and goods that were produced for decarbonization, but they have higher value and the prices are higher. And when we, like youth, are choosing our next step to be less carbonized, for example, choosing EV vehicle or solar panels, we tend to choose Chinese productions because they are cheaper and they are reliable too. What are the possible solutions that you might implement in order to like Europeans to choose European stuff and European goods? Because even if we become decarbonized like total nothing and simply null, we will like support Chinese economy. So my question for the whole youth would be, can we decrease the price, or what's the problem behind it, and why should we choose European overpriced decarbonized goods? Thank you.
Is that for the panel as a whole or to someone in particular?
Someone who wants to answer.
Okay. I don't know if we can...
But I have to start with
Go ahead,
some of the reactions.
Thank you.
As a shadow on taxonomy, you know what? The details that you're mentioning are not in the legislation. You cannot blame legislator for something what is not in there. The DNSH, do no significant harm, and that is the word significant, it's a very relevant element. But no, the legislation does not. The primary legislation, and that's where the question primary versus secondary comes, the primary legislation doesn't say that you have to have these things, all you mentioned. So please don't put it on the legislator. Then that's where what I think it's important in here is really to have, and that's linked also to the whole disclosure and the CSR, the CSTRIPL, and all the other legislations, is that what I believe is that we indeed should at first look at what can be fixed within the secondary legislation, because also I believe it's something that can be done much faster than the legislative process. And then assess, and I believe that we also have to do some primary legislation changes. I agree with that. But we have to indeed not create uncertainty Because yes, if I go and limit what is now on the table on the CSDDD, the scope to basically level 1, then yes, you're opening a massive, massive risks. Don't care about the environment, child labor. Because I'm Chinese company, I do lovely Uyghur slave labor, but BMW won't buy from me because you don't buy these things. But with tier 1, I just put a middleman. And you don't get beyond that. This is where we need to work on it sensitively. I agree that we need to look at it. What my concern is that not even the Commission proposal, but I am concerned is even more in the Parliament because of the populism that is out there. There is a risk of ultimately a chainsaw, and there are people who can do sculptures with a chainsaw, but generally you end up with a mess. And we need to be very careful on how we do that. On the question, you might want to have an answer to the question.
Please do.
This is, the question is going to be slightly different because I think the answer is going to be more complex because I think the issue is also, and what's coming is it's going to be Chinese cars made in Europe, and that's going to be the challenge. What I heard from car suppliers now is not the imports of tires. Continental was telling me, what they have a challenge with is not the Chinese made, it's the Chinese who have built the factories in Europe, follow all the European legislation and outcompete that. The Indians, the same thing. They build in Europe. And this is what the question is also, okay, how do we make sure that the European-based node companies also are strong, not only in Europe, but globally? Because yes, BMW has a massive factory, and I think the Riley you have in the US, you have massive factories in China. It's a global company.
Yes.
And that's also a very important factor in this with the global supply chains.
I appreciate you mentioning we're going to get a chainsaw politically if we don't act properly. There are huge political dimensions to the decisions that are being made in Brussels and by industry and by other countries as well. So I know Kyriacos wanted to make a comment.
I don't want to. It's a very interesting discussion that we have here. But I'm a Becker. I'm not a politician. I come from the Ministry of Finance of Cyprus, and I have to say that we have to believe in Europe, and we have to act within what Europe is today. Simplification. It came up from Draghi, from Letter Report. It's indeed. We are discussing it for 2 days here. But I think we have to protect Europe's competitiveness, and we have also to deliver on Europe's target on green transition and our climate commitment. To me, competitive and climate commitment, these are one side. So we have to work to that direction. The European Investment Bank, it's here. I mean, it's usually it's the member states bank, and it's we get the mandate from the Commission, and we operate like that. But at the same time, we are really flexible and to develop financial instruments in order to meet the needs. I mean, there's to support security focus, energy security focus, to support energy efficiency in remote areas. I mean, there are so many challenges to do in order to really to bring this transition. I mean, more close.
Thank you very much. Final. One quick question from the audience, if we have one. If not, then I'll do a quick wrap up and we'll move on because we only have like a minute and a half left. Gentlemen, any burning statement you want to make as we end this panel? And it really has to be one or two sentences max. Please.
As much as I'm in favor of simplification, I followed this debate for the last 20, 25 years. I don't believe it will happen. I mean, it's unfortunate, but there have been many exercises in the past at European level to simplify. It has not worked.
Thank you. Any other final statements from the panelists? Any points you'd like to make back? I sense.
No, well, I mean, on this one, we need to try, and here's about very concrete things we have just set up, and we know what we need to change, so I think this can work. But the other part, it's clear that we need to lead globally on decarbonization, but we need, as I said earlier, we need to make it in a way where we stay economically successful. That's the best chance for world climate.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to end it here. We're right down to the wire. I want to thank all of our panelists for an invigorating discussion. I really appreciate that we brought out some of the tensions in this debate and got very concrete too in terms of policy terms. I really respect that, appreciate that. I appreciate all of you being with us here, and I hope we can meet again at GlobeSec in the future. And just a final note before we wrap up. I have instructions to please ask you to stick around because we have another great panel coming up on this stage, the Havel stage. Europe's role in a changing world, can it save the global order? Well, maybe. Anyway, so go away. Thank you.